It is 4:30. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to Financing Philadelphia's Future, our continuing conversation with amazing people talking about the possibility and the offerings of a Philadelphia public bank. Today, our guest is Adriane Abizadeh-Barbour. She is the executive director of Kensington Corridor Trust, which I like to say, it has a national reputation. I was just telling her that I'm here at a conference in Atlanta, and it came up on, one of the main panels, the work that's going on in Kensington. But anyway, for those of you who are joining us, I hope a lot of you are regulars. If you're not, please put your name and email in the chat. Also, put any questions that you have in the chat. We encourage those, but also give us what neighborhood you're chatting from. You can join the Philadelphia Public Banking Coalition's mail list and get notices about these monthly events and other things by also putting that email in the chat. All right. Welcome, Adriana. So glad you could join us today. I'm going to turn it over to you and let you give a brief introduction of yourself and your background.
Absolutely. Thanks, Vanessa, for having me. So again, my name is Adriane Abizadeh-Barbour, Executive Director of the Kensington Corridor Trust. By way of background, I'm originally from Camden, so not a Philadelphian, but don't hold it against me. I am right across the bridge, and my career started in affordable housing in my community, so in Camden. I then transitioned and worked on immigration public policy for several years in the state of New Jersey, so practically lived in the State House in Trenton for numerous years. And then for the last 6 years, I've been with the Kensington Corridor Trust, really combining both of those expertise areas of affordable housing and public policy to build the neighborhood trust model.
Wonderful, wonderful. So tell us about the neighborhood trust model. Is this a new offering or just something that's now sort of taking hold?
Great question. So we are the nation's first neighborhood trust. The trust was launched in 2019. And we really like to think of this as a model that was developed on prior learnings, right? So we're not the first and we won't be the last to think of collective ownership as a tool for democratizing finance, for thinking about participatory democracy in governance. But we did develop a new legal infrastructure that allows for neighborhoods to collectively control, own, and govern their real estate in a way that benefits them and allows them to self-determine their path forward. And so our work at the Kensington Corridor Trust over the last 7 years since the trust launched in 2019 has been to acquire real estate on Kensington Avenue and place it into a trust for the neighborhood to directly own, govern, and control outside of the speculative market, right? So taking it out of the everyday capitals market and putting it into the commons where neighbors can determine what affordability means. They can determine what small businesses they want to attract to their corridor. They get to determine what investments are made into their built environment as we think about social determinants of health and zip code and the outcomes around health, physical health, mental health that are associated with that. And so to date, the trust has acquired 32 assets that are held in trust. We do a combination of land conservation and building preservation. So we are stewarding vacant land that has been converted into a community garden, and we are also rehabbing properties that we're acquiring that are coming into the portfolio vacant and oftentimes long time abandoned and unutilized. We also, for a sliver of our portfolio, bring in assets that are already revenue generating to help bolster the portfolio's success in terms of the financial flows, but also to take assets that would otherwise move from potential predatory to potential other predatory and extractive actors into community control and collective control. And so that's been our work. We are currently in the process of replicating our model in Trenton, New Jersey, with the support of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and we're actively looking at replication across the country, really just to ensure that other folks have the capacity to practice collective ownership should they choose as an alternative to individualized ownership and as an alternative to external ownership.
I want to touch on a couple of things. Let's go back and talk about neighborhood ownership. So what does that look like? Does everybody in Kensington own a piece of these assets that you're buying? Talk to us about how that looks.
Technically, yes. So there are about 32,000 co-owners to the trust. So the neighborhood trust model, ownership is defined by your residence or your small business being placed in the 19134 zip code. So if you live here or have a small business here, you are co-owner, which means that at any time you are eligible to govern over the assets, to make decisions around those assets, right? So how they're being utilized, what businesses are attracted, where we do public investment. And if the trust at any time does something that you feel does not uphold the original purpose, which is twofold. The first is intergenerational affordability in a neighborhood that's actively experiencing displacement. And the second being collective control and ownership of real estate in the commons outside of the speculative market. You have the right to lay claim against the assets, right? So you can take the trust to court if you believe that we're not upholding the original purpose that we were designed for because you are a co-owner. You have that legal right. There are no individual dividends that are currently distributed within the model. So all of the surplus revenue is put back into a pot that the neighborhood then determines where to invest it at scale in the neighborhood. We're in the process now as an evolution to our model. We are working with the Guild, which is based in Atlanta, that has a different model called the Community Stewardship Trust model that does allow for unaccredited investments and then allows for the dividend distribution to those unaccredited investors. We're working on building that into our model now. So we'll be piloting that with one property, our highest revenue generating asset, to reduce the risk, the financial risk, to our investors. And so Class A of the shares will be for folks who are living in the 19134 zip code, who are at 80% AMI or below. So average household median income of 80% or below is the preferred share class for investments. And investments will be as low as $10 and max out at $10,000 across 5 years.
So I just really want to drill into this sort of like this voting and engagement from the neighborhood. So
Mhm.
how do you get the word out, and what level of engagement have you had from the community that is in that zip code?
Yeah, this is a great question that we get all the time. So we're a really small crew. So we lean a lot on existing community organizations and groups to help us get the word out into the community. We do a lot of canvassing. You may see right now, right? I'm wearing the KCT swag. This is how we are every single day when we're out here, so that folks can identify us very easily, see us, come up to us, ask questions, and engage in dialogue with us. So in addition to canvassing a lot and being up and down the corridor, we do the traditional methods as well. So social media, email blasts, text blasts, phone calls, obviously presenting in community meetings. And what we've found is it's not sufficient, right? There are about 32,000 folks in these 6 census tracts. We think maybe over the last 6 to 7 years, we've come into contact with about 5,000 of them. So still like 25, 6, 7,000 people who live right here and don't know that they co-own real estate, right? And so we've had conversations with funders about potentially giving us some capital to do mass mailing distribution so that all of a sudden, everybody in the 6 census tracts that we touch gets a piece of mail that says, hey, did you know that you co-own? The challenge on the back end of that is we might get 32,000 phone calls that come in overnight, right?
Mm-hmm.
As folks start to realize that they have co-ownership, because that's what happens, right? As soon as someone realizes that they are a co-owner, they have lots of questions, and like beautiful, inquisitive questions that we want to answer. We have 5 full-time staff. And so thinking about where is the balance between making sure that folks are informed and that they know, and having the capacity to answer questions as they arise. So I would say our most prominent space for engagement has been the garden, the community garden that we steward. Most folks know us for the garden. They know that the garden is theirs. They know that they co-own it, even if they don't fully understand everything else. At a base level, folks know that the garden is their garden, that they own it, and they have the ability to, have events there at no cost and use the space at no cost. And so just trying to make sure that we continue to inform folks more and more every day, and continue to meet new people every day.
There you go. So let's acknowledge here that, I mean, Kensington, you now have a national reputation. I mean, this is being talked about at these conferences and other conferences. Um, Kensington was known nationally as the opioid epidemic. That all the pictures,
Yes.
with people all over the country were like, that's where they. So I was part of the Vanguard tour that happened, I guess
Hmm.
it was last year sometime. And man, does it look really different. And we
Hmm.
we went to the garden. It was absolutely gorgeous. And I was shocked. I used to work in the neighborhood next to it,
Hmm.
next to Kensington, in, I think it's called Fair, the one with an F.
Fishtown?
Anyway, what's that?
Fishtown.
It wasn't Fishtown. Anyway, it was
Fair
close
Hill.
enough that I too
Fairhill.
saw people walking on the street and literally seeming like zombies and falling down.
Hmm.
I did not see any of that when we did the tour. We did many blocks, and so
Hmm.
I was really really impressed. And so to sort of understand you're buying up property. You mentioned that you're getting some already revenue generating property. I started
Yes.
talking about the opioid epidemic because a lot of these properties, that was a struggling area. A lot of the
Hmm.
properties were abandoned, long-term abandoned, and these are the
Hmm.
properties you are accessing, yes?
Yes.
Okay. And so, but you mentioned that you had some revenue generating assets. Were those active businesses?
Yes. So they are properties that have been redeveloped by private developers. So
Uh,
folks coming in from New York and elsewhere who are taking a financial kind of chance, if you would, at the time that they did their investment into Kensington, waiting for the financial upside to become apparent and then exiting their assets. And so whenever possible, we want that asset to exit into the trust, into community control, instead of trading hands to another private developer who will continue to extract from the asset, right? Like if you live in New York, you're probably not even coming down here. You have no idea what the state of your building is like. You probably don't have a deep relationship with your tenants. And that's not to say that that's across the board, right? It's a little stereotypical what I'm offering, but it also is the common use case, right? And we know that for a fact. We acquired a property a year and a half ago directly next to the community garden. Three brothers from New York purchased the property sight unseen. They had never even come to Kensington at all. And they were very transparent about it, right? Like our broker called us. He told us that Kensington was going to be a great place to have financial upside. So we bought this property. We've never seen it. We have no idea what it looks like. We know that it's not leasable. That's all we know. And we were like, can you come down here? Can you meet us at the property? Like we would love for you to see what your building is doing to this block where we've been redeveloping assets and yours is just sitting vacant and unusable and dilapidated. And so they came down and we met them and we negotiated the acquisition and that asset is now in the trust. But it's not an uncommon story for folks
yeah.
to make investments in neighborhoods like Kensington. And this is not exclusive to Kensington
Hmm.
either, right? This is happening across the country at scale.
Yes, yes, including in Germantown, Mount Airy, my area.
Hmm.
I remember the name. Frankfurt is where I used to work.
Yeah.
So, yeah, right there under the L.
Hmm.
Um, okay, so we talked about the assets, but let's go back to the community piece. Talk about
Hmm.
the board structure, because I think that's a key piece then of, those are often the people who are helping you to stay in touch with the rest of the community. So, talk about that.
Absolutely. Those are our amplifiers, right? They are the key stewards to this work. So, our governance is comprised 100% of residents and small business owners from this zip code. So, in order to govern, you have to be one of the co owners. Outsiders are legally not allowed to govern. And that structure was designed that way by the neighborhood. So, when we did a year-long engagement process around what do you want governance to look like, they said, well, we want to govern by ourselves, right? Like, we are more than capable of self determining the future of this neighborhood. And if there is an expertise that we lack, we will hire that person, right? If we need a lawyer, we'll hire a lawyer. If we need an accountant, we'll hire an accountant, an architect, et cetera. And so every year in January, we put an open call out at the neighborhood level and let folks know that seats are available. This year, for example, in 2026, there were 4 seats available based on term turnover, and we received 21 applications for the 4 seats. The existing slate of folks who are on the board are the ones that determine who comes in to those 4 seats. They are not looking at things like a traditional governance would look at, right? And you sit on a traditional board, everybody's like, okay, we got to have our lawyer, our accountant, our HR person. And then, if we're running a specific type of program, we want somebody who has that expertise in that area. At the trust, folks are really looking at where do you sit inside of the neighborhood, right? Like what census tract are you inside of? Are you on the far end, the north, the south? What relationships do you have with the community partners on the ground? Are you volunteering somewhere already? Are you already serving on another board? What leadership position do you potentially hold in the neighborhood? Are you a block captain? Are you someone who's already organizing your block around advocacy or around beautification? Those are the levers that they're most interested in. And what has happened and when it's produced year over year is we get to attract these beautiful people to the trust who we otherwise may not have met. So it's the other thing, right? This is part of the way of how we meet people because they hear about us. We haven't yet met them, at least not like on our staff side. And while they may have a relationship or two on governance, it's not across the board. And so we get to meet these folks who don't have pre-existing relationships and we get to build with them, right? We get to self-determine and co-design the future of the trust and the future of this work. And so our governance, as I said, fully comprised by the neighborhood. The other thing worth noting about our governance is that our folks are compensated double the living wage per hour to govern. So we believe at the trust that time is a social justice issue and it deeply impacts, disproportionately and deeply impacts low and moderate income folks, particularly in communities like Kensington. And so we want to make sure that folks know that their time is valued, that their expertise that they're leveraging in terms of their lived experience and otherwise is valued. And so it's about $46 per hour. It amounts to about a $1,200 stipend per board member per year. And it's a very critical part of the way that we do governance here at the trust, right? It is a very important role that you take on when you take on stewardship of these assets that are collectively owned.
Yeah, that's one of the things I really love about that. It's being talked about more, at least on LinkedIn. It's like, oh, we really need to pay people
Yeah,
for that kind of service because it does take quite a bit of work. All
it
right,
does.
so considering we are the Philadelphia Public Bank, or will be hopefully one day, let's move into the
Yes.
financing. So, what are your sources of financing?
Mhm.
Where are you finding it, and what are you sort of asking for right now?
Yeah, so 100% of our financing right now is coming from foundation endowments. So we are going to the foundations and we're asking them to lend to us from their endowments. So they're loans that are called program related investments and mission aligned investments. And then we are also going to individuals who have wealth who would like to invest in our work and would like to support our work. We can also bring in gifts, right? So donations and grants. We have the capacity to do that as well. What we are not doing currently and haven't since inception is we are not leaning in with banks or CDFIs because the interest rates are too high for us in order to preserve the affordability of the assets. And so all of our debt that the trust has raised sits between 0 and 2% interest rates and between 10 and 15-year term periods, which is far more favorable than market, right? So if I went into the bank right now and I said, hey, we'd like to acquire this asset, they will say to us, absolutely, we'd love to help you make this happen. The interest rate is probably going to be somewhere around 6 to 7%. And we can hold this term period for about 5 years. And then we're going to need to revisit both, if we want to continue in the deal and recapitalize you, or if we need to reassess the interest rate based on whatever the market standards are at that time, which then puts the trust in a very precarious situation. Because if we're trying to preserve affordability intergenerationally, we can't live on 5-year cycles, right? This is hundreds of years worth of disinvestment and compounded by systemic harms and all of the isms. And then we want to take a 5-year loan at market rate interest and say, produce permanently affordable housing and produce permanently affordable commercial space. It's close to impossible. And so right now, as I said, just really dependent on program related investments from foundations and individual investors. And then obviously the combination of grants and subsidy along the way. We do not have a government dependency. So we're not currently utilizing government capital for this work and haven't since inception. That is intentional and by design. We want this to be a self-sustaining model that lives outside of the safety net that exists in government. Because as we all see, and we're kind of living this out right now, government funding can also be quite precarious. It's also highly bureaucratic. It also comes with lots of levers and restrictions that oftentimes actually perpetuate poverty. And so we want to be very cautious about where we tap into capital and that we're really creating space and opportunity for folks to access upward mobility.
Okay, okay. So, in thinking about our future public bank,
Mhm.
um, and who knows when it will happen, do you see what kind of partnerships do you see? Because it is going to be a different model than a traditional city bank
Absolutely.
or that kind of thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think there's a couple of different points where having a public bank could be extremely beneficial to models like the Kensington Quarter Trust that are trying to advance collective ownership or even just traditional structures that are trying to advance affordable housing and affordable commercial space redevelopment. One is support for lower acquisition costs loans, right? So we need to acquire these assets. That first tranche of capital to acquire is some of the hardest capital to secure because for many loans, they want you to have site control, right? So they want to see that you already own the asset or already have it in some ways secured through a long-term lease for acquisition. And so getting folks to buy into that, no, we just need help buying it, right? Like we just need to get it into the trust. That's the first step. Being able to access flexible, low interest rate loans could be really helpful. And we've seen evidence of that out with other public banks, right? I'm looking directly at California, thinking very intentionally about how they've been able to leverage that. The other thing that I think public banks could do really well and could mirror a lot of the type of capital that we brought in from foundations is they can be more patient, right? So we don't have to look at a 5-year term cycle. That's actually a choice, right? That's a standard that's been developed by traditional banking norms. That is a choice. And so public banks could choose to do something differently. And you could say, you know what, a 10-year cycle is actually typical. A 15-year cycle is actually typical and really meet the demands that are needed by the organization and by the project rather than market demands and market constraints. I think it could potentially long term help to replace some of our dependence on national foundations and actually allow us to scale and replicate more quickly because of the access to the scale of capital that could be within a public bank, particularly if it's tapping into pension funds or other types of funds in order to capitalize its balance sheet. I have two more ways that I think it could potentially be helpful. Pre-development costs, right? So thinking about that post-acquisition, but not yet construction side, we have to pay for architects, design work. We've got to go through permitting and licensing. Sometimes we need to run a feasibility study or do some scenario analysis. All of those costs are difficult to fundraise for, and folks want to see that you're moving through that stage of construction fairly quickly, which means that people only want to provide that short-term gap financing for 12 months, 18 months, 24 months. But the reality is sometimes you need more time, particularly if you're doing the engagement work as we are of co-designing with community. 12 months is insufficient, right? It took us 12 months just to decide that we wanted to have 2 youth seats on our board, right? So
Right.
there are things that, if you are going to intentionally engage and meaningfully engage with people and have depth of relationship and right relationship, it's not something that can be done overnight. And then the last thing that I was going to say is I think the public banking, in addition to supporting our work directly through the development of affordable housing and affordable commercial space, could also help to lever support for the small businesses that we're attracting to the corridor, right? Making sure that they can tap into capital that is flexible, that is low interest as possible to ensure that they are successful. There's nothing that I think bars folks more from being able to launch their businesses than the access to capital. It is so extremely difficult, particularly for communities that we know have been historically locked out of access. Even in 2026, there are very intentional lockouts that happen. And I think a public bank would be a great way to unlock some of that capital and get it flowing towards entrepreneurs who have really great ideas and just need the support to launch.
Yeah, yeah. I want to yeah, when I did the tour, I really love the grocery store that's coming to the area, but I want to
Yes.
open it up now for some other folks to ask questions. Peter, do we have anything in the chat, or does anybody have any questions? We've got about 10 minutes, so I wanted to open up the space.
I think some of the questions in the chat having to do with the sources of funds have been answered already.
Okay.
Um, and I'm wondering, Adriana, how do you work with potential businesses coming into the corridor where you are a process for identifying what the community wants or needs and attracting folks in and being able to assist them in their business startup?
Absolutely. It's a great question. So I will say 2 things. One, we've done a lot of engagement at the neighborhood level to hear from folks about what they want to see on the corridor. So just kind of broad blanket strokes, right? And that's where we learned about the grocery store, right? So it was one of the very first things that we heard when we first launched the trust. And when I first joined the trust 6 years ago, everyone said, listen, nobody knows what a neighborhood trust is. We don't actually know what collective ownership is. But you say that you want to make investments on Kensington Avenue. You say you want to bring businesses back, bring a grocery store. If you do nothing else, bring a grocery store. And so we've been working at it this entire time. It was one of the most challenging projects that I've worked on in my career. For folks who are unaware, attracting a grocery store is no small feat. You have to find the right building. You have to find the right operator. There's extremely slim margins in the grocery space as it is. And we're a high crime neighborhood, right? And so trying to find who that right operator would be was very hard, on top of first finding the right piece of real estate, the right location for it. And so, as Vanessa noted, we'll be launching this grocery store. All things accordingly go to my life plan. It'll open before the end of May. And we'll be announcing that on our social media and send out email blasts and canvas and flyer and all the things. But I think the thing that I think has made the trust very successful, at least in its engagement efforts, is that we listen and we hold on to the piece, right? So it wasn't like I heard 6 years ago that we want a grocery store and then I just kind of let it go. I was like, friends, this is going to be hard. I will hold on to this. I promise I will work on this. Give me the lower hanging fruit. And so the second thing that everyone asked us for were opportunities for youth to engage in positive spaces after school. So we had just about 5-6 years before the trust was launched, the Salvation Army that was on Allegheny, which was a huge catchment for young folks after school, had shuttered. And so there was this big empty building and folks felt like there really wasn't space for young folks to drop into after school. That was a low hanging fruit because there actually were nonprofit partners in the neighborhood who are working with youth who just needed access to space, both outdoor space and indoor space. So we now have an organization that directly leases from the trust that is working with young folks to access culinary, right? So working with them to do culinary skills, serve safe certifications, help them get into culinary school if that's their desire, or jump right into the employment space if that's their desire. We're working right now to attract another youth nonprofit that works with young folks to get them into the building trades. So thinking about electrical, plumbing, HVAC, greening, roofing, et cetera. And we have 2 long-term partnerships at the community garden for outdoor activation, where young folks are out there and are able to get their hands dirty, get in the soil, build some carpentry skills, have fun outside, throw water balloons, whatever makes them happy and brings them joy that day. That garden space is theirs to utilize. And so that was a lower hanging fruit that was easy for us to have both, wins and accomplishments, but also to build the meaningful partnerships and relationships that folks asked us for. At a higher level, once we identify a potential business, and typically the identification is because they have reached out to us. So a small business will call us and say, hey, I heard you have affordable commercial space on Kensington Avenue. I'm from Kensington. I would love to learn more. We meet with them, we take in their application. The board will do a financial analysis to make sure that they can afford to pay their rent based on their business model and its revenue generation. And then we are required to go out on a multi-month engagement strategy out into the neighborhood. So we do about 3 to 4 months of engagement for every small business owner that wants to come to the trust. And we attend every public meeting available in the neighborhood. We do the social media, we flyer, we canvas, all the same things. And we say, do you want this here, right? Is this the small business that you want in your collectively owned space? And if it's not, great. We're not going to lease to them. And if it is, great. We want to make sure that you know where they'll be located and how you can support them. And as a result of that process, we've not lost a single business that we've attracted to the corridor. We've seen nothing but ongoing growth, including the addition of new job opportunities that are living wage. And we're seeing that folks are coming more and more to the trust looking for spaces because the word of mouth is getting out that when you come to the trust, not only will you receive the support of having a lower rent and have access to the community, but you also get the wraparound support of like, hey, I got this letter in the mail. We just literally, one of our tenants the other day walked in. I got this postcard from the state of Pennsylvania. I don't know what it means, right? Great. Let's read it together. Let's find out what filing thing you need to do. We'll sit down, we'll tackle it and make sure that you remain compliant and that everything stays registered properly. And so it's just this ongoing conversation around what does it look like to positively attract businesses to be successful that meets the demands of the neighborhood and what they see and envision for their corridor, alongside how do we ensure that that business owner is actually successful and that they can build intergenerational wealth for themselves and their families and not just be in a state of surviving, but really move into thriving.
Do you support or even favor a cooperative model,
We
either a
do.
consumer co-op or worker co-op?
We do. So we practice solidarity economics within our work and participatory democracy, circular economy. All of that work is deeply embedded in our practice and the way that we show up. For 18 months out of this last 6 years of my life, we spent deep time trying to actually make the grocery store be a worker-owned co-op. So for 18 months, we worked alongside PACA, the Philadelphia Area Cooperative Alliance. Yes, PACA,
Mhm.
to see if we could lift that up. And what we learned was it's extremely difficult, right? So there are very few co-op grocery stores that exist across the country. Several are actually in Philadelphia. So we've got Weaver's Way and some others. It's hard work to lift up. You have to identify folks who already have expertise in managing grocery spaces. And so the other thing worth noting is the KCT does not manage businesses. So we are not a business owner. We are collectively stewarding physical space. And so we need to identify the operators. We're trying to identify the business owners who are able to do this work. And after 18 months of like deep study, deep exploration and research, trying to put together plans, we just weren't able to find the folks who could lift up the worker ownership element. And right around that same time, we were still trying to figure it out. We identified an operator who actually already had some experience in the food industry and was from this neighborhood and was willing to lift up the grocery store. And so we're really excited to open it with them, but it was not for lack of effort on our part. It doesn't mean that we won't try again in the future. But we also had a commitment to bring a grocery store and we identified an operator who said yes. So the goal was to bring a grocery store. We are achieving that goal. But it is my hope that at some future point we can attract co-ops to the corridor. We've even had very intentional conversations in the neighborhood about what it would look like to produce a place-based strategy around co-ops, right? So what would it look like if Kensington just became the stomping grounds of co-ops in the city of Philadelphia, right? If this corridor became a central location for them to work together and be in community together, what a beautiful thing that would be.
Yeah, we've got really about 2.5 more minutes. So, Adriane, I think we explained that we can continue the conversation, but we do have to, sort of say goodbye at 4:30 to the rest of the crowd. But we want more questions with these last 2 minutes. Anything else, Peter?
Not for me.
Well, so I just want to follow up on the co-op question. Weaver's Way actually, you may actually know, is a consumer-owned co-op. It's owned by the purchasers, not a worker-owned co-op. I think most grocery stores that are co-ops actually are consumer-owned rather than worker-owned.
Yes.
Exactly why that particular kind of business is better suited to consumer ownership, I'm not sure. But did you explore that model?
We did, indeed. Yes.
Okay.
So we went down a deep dive with PACA of all of the different co-op structures that exist, including worker-owned, member-owned. We looked at producer-owned. There's lots of different co-op structures.
Right.
And we determined that in alignment with our own values, we really wanted it to be worker owned, that was where we were going to spend our time and our energy and our resources. And again, it was not fruitful. It wasn't fruitful in the fact that we didn't end up with a worker owned grocery store, but we learned a ton. We built a lot of relationships across the country with folks who are practicing co-op grocery store work. Again, not predominantly, most of them not being worker owned. But yeah, it was where we value aligned the most from our own value set.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, the guy, so when I did the Vanguard tour and we were in the grocery store, we were with the fellow who came through and, clearly long time connected to Kensington, right? His parents, I think,
He
still
grew up
live
here.
there.
Yeah. He grew up here. His mom still lives
Yeah.
4 blocks away. She calls me
Yeah.
as soon as something happens. Somebody illegally dumped the garden that got tagged. I saw somebody leave a bag of trash. And I'm like, yes, thank you so much. We were on it. I'm going to do it. And so, and then that's where the accountability to this work comes in too, right? We get calls. The community calls
Right.
us when something
Right.
happens, when something on the corridor is not quite right in place. Hey, Adriana, did you see that XYZ happen? Oh my gosh, I didn't. Let me
Right.
walk out there. Let me see what's going on. Let me see if we can get that, rectified. And so building that trust and knowing that we are accountable has been a huge part of our work.
Fantastic. All right. So we have to say goodbye to the larger crowd. Thank you all for joining us. Join us next month for the continuing conversation. And thank you so much.